In 1913, Argentina stood among the top 10 wealthiest nations on Earth per capita. Yet, since declaring independence in 1816, this nation has defaulted on its external debt 9 separate times. A century of prosperity, undone by a cycle of self-inflicted wounds. How does a country blessed with such immense agricultural wealth transform into a serial defaulter? The answer lies in a fatal economic mechanism. It is a century-long trap of short-term fixes, where currency pegs and debt binges repeatedly sacrificed long-term stability for immediate relief. At the dawn of the 20th century, Argentina was an agricultural powerhouse. Vast fertile plains produced grain and beef that fed an industrializing Europe. The economy boomed, and European immigrants flooded into Buenos Aires, building a city that proudly earned its nickname, the Paris of South America. Between 1880 and 1905, GDP per capita soared from 35% to 80% of the United States average. This rapid growth made Argentina comparable to France, Germany, and Canada. The wealth was undeniably real, but it was built on a dangerously fragile foundation. The entire economic miracle relied almost exclusively on exporting raw agricultural commodities. There was little diversification. When global demand was high, fortunes were made overnight. But this narrow export model meant that Argentina's financial fate was entirely tethered to the unpredictable whims of global markets. Then, the global economy dramatically shifted during the Great Depression of the 1930s. International trade collapsed, and demand for Argentine exports evaporated almost instantly. The golden era shattered, leaving the nation desperate for a new direction to save its suddenly crippled economy. Faced with this unprecedented crisis, Argentina made a political choice that would haunt it for a century. Instead of adapting to the new global reality, leaders turned inward. They abandoned the export model, choosing to heavily shield domestic industries from foreign competition. This strategy, known as import substitution, was designed to create self-sufficiency. It felt like a safe harbor in a stormy world. However, this inward turn would slowly strangle the nation's competitiveness, laying the groundwork for the recurring economic tragedies that were soon to follow. The prosperity of the early 20th century masked a fragile political system. When the global economy collapsed in the 1930s, Argentina's export-driven model cracked under pressure. The crisis didn't just reshape the economy, it triggered a political earthquake. In 1930, a sudden military coup overthrew the elected government, marking the end of stability. This wasn't just a political shift, it was the beginning of chronic political instability. Short-term fixes would now replace long-term economic strategy. To protect local industry from collapsing global trade, Argentina adopted import substitution policies. The idea was simple: produce locally what was previously imported. It was meant to create true economic independence and shield the nation from future shocks. But did it actually work? Initially, factories sprouted across the nation, and local production grew rapidly. But these policies created severe market inefficiencies across the board. Industries relied heavily on government subsidies and protection, lacking the competitive edge to survive in global markets. To keep these inefficient industries afloat, government spending skyrocketed. The state expanded its reach into nearly every economic sector, but the fiscal burden became deeply unsustainable. The short-term relief of protectionism was breeding a massive long-term crisis. This heavy reliance on state spending created a dangerous, vicious cycle. As fiscal deficits grew, so did the temptation for quick monetary fixes. Was protectionism the right path, or did it ultimately trap the nation in a cycle of dependency? The import substitution model limped along for decades, masking deep structural flaws beneath a veneer of progress. It provided jobs and temporary calm, but at the steep cost of productivity. The economy was stagnating and political tension was rising once again. By the 1970s, chronic inflation eroded the economic gains of the working class. The glaring inefficiencies of protected industries became impossible to ignore. The entire economic system was buckling under its own massive weight. Import substitution aimed to create economic independence, but it bred deep inefficiency instead. The military, watching the economy crumble, decided they had the ultimate solution. They planned to fix it by opening the floodgates of foreign debt. In 1976, the military took over again. They abandoned the old model and embraced massive foreign borrowing. This new strategy would soon turn Argentina into a serial defaulter, pushing the nation toward an unprecedented economic catastrophe. In 1976, a military coup drastically changed Argentina's trajectory. The generals engineered an economic disaster alongside their political control. Foreign debt exploded from $8 billion to $45 billion in just 7 years. How did they burn through it? The borrowed billions didn't build factories. They fled the country. Capital flight became the national sport. Meanwhile, the military regime's disastrous policies caused industrial production to collapse by 20%. The economic foundation was crumbling beneath their feet, but the workers paid the heaviest price. Real wages lost 36% of their purchasing power. Families who once enjoyed one of the highest living standards on earth could not afford basic groceries. The Argentine middle class was systematically wiped out. What would you do if your entire life savings became worthless? When democracy returned in 1983, the economic crisis was already ticking. The government tried to pay off the massive debt by printing money. It was like pouring water into a leaking dam. The consequences for the economy were catastrophic. By the late 1980s, inflation reached a staggering 5,000%. Prices changed hourly. Supermarket employees ran through aisles with megaphones, shouting new prices. The national currency became worthless paper. Citizens rushed to spend paychecks before lunchtime, fearing afternoon devaluation. Foreign debt equaled 75% of the entire gross national product. Argentina was effectively bankrupt. Hyperinflation was destroying the nation's social fabric, erasing decades of progress in mere months. The traditional economic system was broken beyond any conventional repair. People lost their life savings overnight. Was this collapse caused by corrupt politicians, or was it an inevitable consequence of global debt traps? Share your thoughts in the comments. But Argentina needed a miracle, and fast. The crisis demanded an extreme solution, something radical, something completely irreversible. In 1991, Economy Minister Domingo Cavallo stepped forward with a shocking proposal. He pegged the Argentine peso directly to the United States dollar, locking the exchange rate at 1-to-1. It was called the Convertibility Plan. By legally tying the peso to the dollar, Cavallo eliminated the central bank's ability to print money irresponsibly. It was a financial straitjacket. Inflation vanished almost overnight, bringing sudden stability to a desperate population. The economy roared back to life. For a brief, glorious moment, it looked like Argentina had finally beaten the curse. But tying your currency to a foreign power is a dangerous game. What happens when the anchor starts pulling you underwater? In 1989, Argentine inflation hit an astronomical 5,000%, wiping out savings overnight. But by 1991, a radical new law promised to kill hyperinflation forever. The cost of this miracle, however, would trap the nation in a fatal illusion. Economy Minister Domingo Cavallo introduced the convertibility law, pegging the new peso to the US dollar at a strict 1-to-1 ratio. Instantly, prices stabilized and confidence returned. The Argentine miracle seemed real, but a rigid currency board carried a hidden, devastating flaw. While the dollar peg cured inflation, it quietly overvalued the peso. Argentine exports became drastically more expensive compared to global competitors. Factories could no longer compete. Industrial competitiveness collapsed, and the trade deficit widened. The fixed exchange rate was slowly choking the economy. If exports were dying, how could a country buy what it needed from the world? The answer was borrowing. The government took on massive foreign debt just to survive the rigid currency board. A silent bubble was inflating, hidden behind the promise of stability. The national debt swelled dangerously as loans papered over structural cracks. If you want to understand how wealthy nations collapse, subscribe for the full breakdown. The borrowing couldn't last forever. The debt bubble was now completely unsustainable, and the walls were closing in. The external world shattered the fragile balance. The 1998 Russian financial crisis and Brazil's sudden currency devaluation sent shockwaves across Latin America. Argentina's rigid 1-to-1 peg meant it could not devalue its currency to absorb the blow. There was no escape valve. As neighbors devalued their currencies, Argentine goods became impossibly expensive. The currency board, designed to enforce discipline, became an economic straitjacket. Capital began fleeing the country. It drained the central bank reserves that backed every peso in circulation. With reserves vanishing and debt obligations mounting, a terrifying question emerged. Could the government actually maintain the sacred 1-to-1 dollar peg? Markets started betting heavily against it. A slow-motion bank run was beginning, one that would paralyze the nation. The government tried desperately to cut spending to appease international lenders, but austerity only deepened the recession. The convertibility trap had snapped shut. The dollar peg cured inflation, yet it killed exports, forcing a debt binge that was about to burst. By 2001, the economy had shrunk by a staggering margin. Over half the population fell below the poverty line. The illusion of the Argentine miracle was dead. A catastrophic default was now inevitable, and the consequences would be devastating. By 1998, the dollar peg that once saved Argentina had become a cage. The economy was bleeding with no escape in sight, but the worst was still to come. From 1998 to 2002, Argentina's economy would shrink by 28%. A contraction of historic proportions. The problem was simple but devastating. Argentina could not print dollars, yet it owed dollars. As international debt piled up, each payment drained real wealth from the country. The fixed exchange rate that once ended hyperinflation had turned from a shield into a trap. By 2001, foreign investors were fleeing. The government scrambled for emergency loans from the International Monetary Fund, but confidence was gone. In December, Argentina did the unthinkable. It defaulted on roughly $100 billion in foreign debt, shattering its financial credibility. The final blow came in January 2002. The peso was unpegged from the dollar and devalued by 70% almost overnight. Millions watched their life savings evaporate instantly. The currency meant to guarantee stability became the instrument of mass financial destruction. Subscribe to learn how economic decisions can lead to disaster. The human cost was staggering. Over 50% of Argentines fell below the poverty line within months. 1 in 4 could not afford basic food. A nation that once ranked among the world's 10 wealthiest now saw half its population struggling simply to survive. The most heartbreaking number was this: 70% of Argentine children were poor in 2002. Schools became soup kitchens. Middle-class families scavenged through garbage on the streets of Buenos Aires. The social fabric of a proud, educated nation was unraveling at terrifying speed. Ask yourself, how does a country with fertile land, an educated workforce, and vast natural resources reach this point? The answer lies in the very mechanism designed to save it. The dollar peg killed the economy it was built to protect. When the peso was locked to the dollar, Argentine exports became far too expensive to compete globally. Factories closed their doors. Over half the population fell into poverty. The government borrowed heavily to maintain the illusion of prosperity, but every new loan only deepened the trap. Protests erupted across Buenos Aires. Citizens banged pots in the streets during the cacerolazos, demanding the resignation of a president who promised stability. Fernando de la Rúa resigned amidst the turmoil, leaving a nation in crisis and political uncertainty. The political system collapsed alongside the economy. But here is the cruel paradox. The very tool meant to guarantee stability, the dollar peg, ultimately destroyed everything it was supposed to protect. The nation was left in ruins. The 2001 collapse was the ultimate lowest point. One might think the country learned its lesson and broke the cycle, but the Argentine paradox was far from over. The pattern of short-term fixes would return again and again, with devastating consequences. In 2002, Argentina lay in economic ruins, shattered by a devastating sovereign default. But by 2003, a miraculous recovery began. GDP growth averaged 9% annually through 2005. The nation even repaid its massive $9.8 billion IMF debt in 2006. It looked like the ultimate comeback story. Prosperity seemed to return to the bustling streets of Buenos Aires. Yet, this apparent triumph masked a dangerous truth. Why did a nation experiencing such explosive growth still harbor the seeds of its own financial destruction? The relief was brutally temporary. Instead of securing long-term stability, leaders reverted to familiar short-term fixes. Debt accumulated rapidly once more. Consequently, the fragile illusion shattered in 2014. Argentina defaulted on its sovereign debt again, proving that old habits die extremely hard. Just 6 years later, the inevitable cycle repeated itself. In 2020, Argentina defaulted for the 9th time since its independence. 9 sovereign defaults. How does a country keep repeating the exact same devastating mistakes, century after century, despite possessing such immense natural wealth? The answer lies in the Argentine paradox. It is a persistent, tragic cycle of choosing immediate relief over sustainable stability. Currency pegs, debt binges, and import substitution always provided a quick fix, but they systematically sacrificed the nation's future for temporary political peace. Back in 1913, Argentina stood proudly among the world's 10 wealthiest states per capita. Its GDP per capita rivaled France and Germany. Today, that glorious legacy feels like a distant myth. The descent from global elite to serial defaulter remains completely unprecedented. This was never just about bad luck or global economic conspiracies. It was a self-inflicted wound, repeated across multiple generations. Every time crisis struck, policymakers reached for the same poison chalice. They borrowed heavily against tomorrow to fund today's political promises. By consistently trading structural stability for fleeting relief, they ensured tomorrow would eventually collapse. The institutions meant to protect the economy became tools for short-term political survival. This structural weakness transformed a land of boundless opportunity into a laboratory of perpetual financial crisis. Argentina's century-long decline stands as a stark warning to the entire world. Wealth is not a permanent guarantee. It can be squandered through poor institutions and short-sighted policies. A rich country can undoubtedly go bankrupt if it continuously ignores fundamental economic realities. From the richest nation in the world to a serial defaulter, Argentina's story is a stark warning. A rich country can go bankrupt if it ignores economic realities. To explore more economic mysteries, check out our next video.